Hello, my name is Jessica Ruth. I'm the widow of Constable Lee Ruth with the RCMP. Lee and I knew each other since we were children, and we were partners in life before he entered the RCMP at 23 years old. Lee's first posting was in 2006, and he medically retired in 2022. During his career, Lee experienced people and incidents that would never leave the back of his mind, no matter how hard he tried. In 2014-2015, Lee started seeing a psychologist, followed by a psychiatrist. He was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Throughout his years of policing, there was a gradual change in my husband. He became hypervigilant, irritable, angry, sad, and disconnected from his family. He pushed others away when he obviously wanted and needed connection. Lee was determined to get better. He received services from his doctor, 3 different psychologists at different points in time, a psychiatrist, and various Veteran Affairs case managers and clinical care managers. From 2014 to 2025, Lee was prescribed approximately 37 different types of medications to address his mental health concerns, with many of these having several dosage changes. Lee attended a 7-week residential treatment facility for trauma and attended ketamine treatment. After many years of fighting for his mental health with no positive results, he decided he could no longer fight.
On June the 4th of this year, my husband died by suicide, leaving behind myself, our children, his parents, his brother, and countless others who loved him. Today I will speak about 2 important issues: prevention, intervention, and access to resources. I think it's important to discuss prevention of operational stress injury. Often police officers, my husband included, work shifts alone. There were many times when backup was located an hour away, placing their lives in unnecessary danger and contributing to poor mental health. When members are off work due to health reasons, this often leaves the unit or the shift short in staff. This creates a workplace environment of animosity, and members are made to feel guilty for taking time to leave or attend to any family-related needs. As far as I know, RCMP members do not need to attend regular counseling. A debriefing to a traumatic event is great, but from my observations, many do not know how the event has impacted them until later when they are experiencing struggles. Before we relocated to Iqaluit, both Lee and I were required to complete psychological assessments. There was no psychological testing required when we transferred out of the North. I believe that if a thorough psychological screening had been completed by an experienced psychologist, there would have been signs that his mental health was at risk. So just a note on access to resources. If a veteran is fortunate enough to have a case manager, most are not provided with a case manager's direct line, but are expected to send an email or navigate phone menus. When someone has significant mental health concerns and legitimate questions about a service, not being able to make a simple phone call to their case manager can have negative impacts. Lee was eventually provided with a direct line to his last case manager. After Lee medically discharged from the RCMP, we relocated back to Western Newfoundland to be closer to family. This transition was not easy for him, and he began to decline even more in his mental health. Lee was very aware of his decline and was active in seeking treatment and resources, but the onus was on him to find these resources. On one occasion, Lee provided consent for me to speak with his case manager, and it was at this time that I learned the case manager's awareness of resources, groups, and organizations was based on the information they had received from other veterans or conversations they had with coworkers. There was no list, no database of resources for different areas and locations. If there was a cost associated to access this resource, it was my husband's responsibility to have his family doctor or psychologist write a letter stating how this resource would benefit his mental health. Often my spouse would talk about sanctuary trauma, a type of psychological trauma that occurs when a person who has already experienced a stressful event is further harmed by the place or institution they expected to be supportive. After years of serving his country as a trusted member of the RCMP to uphold the law, he felt that his needs were often questioned and felt like he had to prove them to be true. The amount of complex paperwork and justification to get benefits approved that he was entitled to was very discouraging and can impede a veteran from obtaining services. Through CAF and RCMP members, Lee learned of VAC's clinical care managers, who assist clients with complex health needs in forming case plans to build supports and to access programs and services. At first, VAC denied him this service, stating that he did not meet the need. Lee would say that though he was considered 100% disabled, he was not ill enough to receive this service. After much advocating from his psychologist, Lee was reassessed and approved for a clinical care manager. He was reminded on a frequent basis that the services of a clinical care manager are only temporary, and an inability to complete tasks would cease the service or could cease the service. Many of the things he could not follow through with due to his mental health, and this made him feel more hopeless and caused him to fear that his services would be revoked. When Lee's clinical care manager planned to be on extended leave during this past summer, he requested the services of another clinical care manager until her return. He was told that now he was too ill for another clinical care manager and that he should consider a local home care worker. I cannot express enough the harmful impact that this had on Lee. He felt like people were giving up on his healing and his recovery. At a time when he was at most ill, VAC wanted to switch him from an educated professional with a master's degree who specialized in mental health to a generalized home care worker. Though Lee had a psychiatrist, psychologist, VAC case manager, and clinical care manager, they mostly worked in silos until he became very sick. Then they began to have some care team meetings. On 2 different occasions, he attended the local hospital. On the first visit, we waited 8 hours to speak to a psychiatrist who told us that there were no beds available. And because he had a psychiatrist already, there was not much more they could do for him there. The second time we visited, my husband spoke privately to an attending physician and was voluntarily admitted to the psychiatric unit. At 3 a.m., he checked himself out. He explained that they would not provide him with his prescribed sleeping medication and offered no alternative. Lee approached his psychiatrist and suggested admission to another hospital in the province. His psychiatrist advised that there was nothing that they could do to the hospital that she was not already doing for him as an outpatient. It was at this point that he had vowed to never again attend the hospital looking for mental health support, because what would be the point? At times when I feared for my husband's safety and suggested that we attend the hospital or call an ambulance, he told me that he would not be going and would threaten to kill himself before they would have time to arrive. I expressed this concern to members of his team. The ongoing response I received was that they were not an emergency service and that if I feared for his safety, I had to call emergency service. This was an unbearable cycle of pain and uncertainty that we lived in as a family. Lee still searched for further service providers and services that might help him and consulted with different members of his care team. One time he was advised that he would be overserviced. Once again, he was discouraged. He might have been overserviced in VAC's opinion. However, in my position as a widow from a husband who took his own life, he was not receiving the appropriate services or care. The impact PTSD has had on our family unit is significant, and it was suggested that I receive counseling covered by VAC as well. The only way that this could be approved was if my husband's psychologist state a case for how treating my mental health would help his mental health. Once again, the onus was on Lee to communicate and arrange treatment, adding more for us to navigate. Families should be given mental health benefits in their own right, not dependent on the veteran. This gives the family skills to deal with complex PTSD, increasing their ability to support their veteran. And in cases like ours, where the worst outcome became reality, it is vital that mental health treatment be in our own right and that we are able to maintain our existing therapeutic relationships. I had to engage with the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman to continue care with my existing therapist after Lee died. We were given 6 months. Having to fight for continued benefits is already weighing on me. Since I lost the love of my life and my children lost their dad, we are getting through each day one moment at a time. I assure you that this is going to be a lifelong journey of healing and recovery from the trauma that I've experienced. I will live the rest of my life wondering, what could I have done differently that would have saved my husband? Our children are young and have so much to process, not with only the death of their father, but of years of living with a parent who has PTSD. This process will not be a short one. Children need years. They need time to build relationships with counselors, to open up to their feelings and thoughts. Kids are not able to connect their feelings with their grief. And this is a vital time to help them learn and practice positive coping skills to safeguard their own mental health. After sharing our experience of losing our mental health benefits with a group of RCMP spouses across the country, one started a petition and connected me with a CAF spouse whose husband died while deployed. The goal of petition E6654 is for families and survivors to obtain mental health benefits in their own right for conditions related to service. Together, they have created a Facebook group dedicated to advocating for families and survivors to obtain mental health treatment benefits in their own right. When the petition closed, it had 5,420 signatures from across Canada. For anyone who knew my husband, Lee, you know that he would have been the first person to stand up and fight for what was right. He had ability to connect with so many people on a personal level. He liked the realness in people and wanted to pump their tires. This was a term he used for making people feel good about themselves. Before Lee became unwell, he was a happy person who loved life and his family and friends. Lee loved our children more than life itself. I believe that he made the ultimate sacrifice. In fear of what impact of prolonged exposure of his complex PTSD would have had on our children and myself. Lee had more courage and resilience than anyone I have ever known. And now that he's no longer able to fight, I feel it's my journey now to help advocate for better mental health services for the veteran community. In the memory of my husband, I am hoping that Lee's legacy will be improved mental health services for RCMP and CAF members, and that families and survivors obtain mental health treatment benefits in their own right for conditions related to service. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ruth, for sharing Lee this morning with us and sharing a little bit of your life with us. I want to say on behalf of our committee my sincere condolence to you, to your family, and your friends. We will now start with Mrs. Ansey for 6 minutes round of questions.
Good morning, Jessica. And I just want to reiterate and thank you for your courage in being here. And again, to say sorry for your loss from all of us sitting here today. Jessica, you reached out to our office, and one of the things that struck me from our communication was this feeling that you had about feeling disrespected and abandoned in this process. And veterans often feel that way in this journey. And I just think it's important that maybe you just expand on that a little bit for the benefit of the work that this committee is doing right now around these supports, if you can.
Sure. So days after my husband passed away, I was in contact with Veteran Affairs to say, okay, what next? Like, this is what's happened. Where do we go from here? And my biggest concern was counseling, continued counseling for myself and my children. I was at that point, I was advised that we no longer were eligible for this benefit to be covered under VAC, because we only receive counseling if it benefits the veteran, and that we do not receive counseling in our own right. I could not believe what I was hearing, because at this time of immense grief, when I can hardly put a sentence together, I was now thinking, okay, so what do I need to do now to continue this counseling with our counselor? I was advised, of that there was the VAC assistance line, but that is very different than long-term, ongoing mental health counselor with someone you've already formed a relationship with. I had to start thinking about, okay, so now I have to apply for either my children to be under my work benefits, or we have to apply if we can reapply under Lee's benefits.
And though that does not seem a lot to some people, when you're in immense grief and you have to think about these things, along with everything else that needs to be done, it's a mountain. It's tremendous. And I just felt like after everything he had done for his country, that we as a family, you know, they say the member serves, the family serves. I don't feel like they thought we were serving.
Thank you. And just to pick up on that point, I mean, we're both moms. Our kids play hockey together. Can you also just describe a little bit more what it's like for your children in his experience as his mental health was deteriorating, and also now, I know it's difficult, but I just think it's important that we understand that component as well.
So as his mental health deteriorated, my children, us as a family life, it was affected. The kids could see, they would ask questions, you know, why is Dad angry? Why is Dad crying? Why can't Dad do these things with us? So it was very difficult to explain that to our children. We tried our best. But they are in a household where PTSD is living. So we requested that my oldest child receive counseling as well, and that it was covered by VAC because it was in my husband's best interest for our children. Our youngest one was not receiving it at the time, just to try to help him cope with, I guess, the environment and his dad's mental health and what that looks like in the family home.
Thank you, and I want to give you an opportunity because, you know, when we walk with people through grief, oftentimes when they see something positive come from something that's extremely painful, I think that helps in the grieving process. And so I just want to ask you, what would you like to see happen differently from all of this that can make a difference in the lives of other people that are potentially in the same situation as you?
Well, there are a few things. One, obviously, I've discussed its mental health benefits in our own right as families and survivors. That is not dependent on the veteran. Some veterans do not either want to engage in treatment, are sick and do not feel that they can, or there's divorce. And in my case, there's death. It cannot be dependent on the veteran. Also, I'd like to see more involvement for VAC case managers. So right now, with regards to veterans who have severe illness, mental illness, physical illness, having to be the person to find the resources in their areas, having it be dependent on them getting notes from their doctors, filling out paperwork, trying to find out what they're eligible for. These are things that I think a case manager should be more involved in. They should be able to have easier access to their case managers. All these resources should be upfront. Shouldn't be having to log into their data, to their secured info to send an email so that someone will call them back, or to use a voice menu. These things are not helpful when someone is having, when someone has a severe mental illness.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ruth.
Thank you, both of you, for being here. And I'll particularly thank you, Jessica, for your courage, because I know that wouldn't have been easy to share your personal and your family story. So thank you for that courage. It's important because it's the only way that we make change. And I know you know that, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. I'm going to start with you because there were a number of things you mentioned. I guess actually let me back up. You know, you've made it very clear that there's a need for the families to be able to have mental health counseling in their own right. I want to say I agree with you was actually something that was part of our Conservative platform in the last election, and I certainly hope it'll be a recommendation in this report. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the veteran themselves, if we can. You've obviously had lots of experience there too, and you mentioned a number of different things. You know, you talked about the various professionals that Lee was working with, that they were all working in silos. You mentioned how, you know, the resources that seemed to be available, it was either he was finding out about them himself, or even the Veterans Affairs caseworkers that he was working with seemed to have, the only reason they had information about resources was stuff they'd gathered from other veterans. So it seems to me like there is probably a good suggestion right there that there needs to be, you know, Veterans Affairs needs to be work better with partners and make sure that there's more access for more options for services and counseling and various other things for our veterans. But beyond that, well, I want your thoughts on that first of all, and then beyond that, is there other things that Veterans Affairs could do differently that would have, you know, helped your husband or others in a better way?
When it comes to case managers and, you know, VAC offering services, we as a family were very grateful for the support that Veteran Affairs provided. However, there are flaws, and one of them is that, you know, though people are eligible for these services due to their mental health conditions, their service, it is on the onus of the veteran to find out what these resources are and to request them. So, for instance, the first time I found out about it, I had spoke to one of the case managers, and it was then, and I was so surprised when I said, can you give me a list? Give me a list of all the available resources that he is eligible for. And I'm not talking financial, I'm talking support. And it was then that I was told, well, there is no list, there is no database.
So if I can, interrupt there, that was shocking to me. When I first heard that, I've heard it a number of times from a number of different veterans and family members. How surprised were you by that? And I mean, is that clearly something that needs to change?
Yes, I was extremely surprised. I said, well, then how does he know about this? She's like, well, the resources that we know about is if I have a veteran on my caseload who's already used a service, or if another caseworker, a case manager, discussed something that one of their veterans had utilized. My concern is how many veterans with severe mental health illness and families, not everyone has the ability to locate, to find these resources and know how to get them.
That's a great point right there. I mean, the onus should not be on the veteran or their family members, or, you know, I hear so often that, you know, veterans that finally do get help, it's like because they just happen across another veteran who gave them a recommendation. It just seems crazy to me that there isn't, you know, that access to resources and that list that needs to be there, a repository of service providers at Veterans Affairs. So thank you for raising that, because I think that's an important recommendation we need. I don't have much time, but I guess I wanted to ask you both a little bit. You both mentioned sanctuary trauma. Can you speak, I guess each of you, if you can, briefly to, you know, that sanctuary trauma that you experienced, or that veterans experience when they're dealing with VAC? What's at the heart of that? What can we do about it?
Madame Roots and Madame Veilleux, you have 10 seconds for both of you, so I'm thinking maybe this is something to come back to Mr. Richards for next rounds of questions. I apologize sincerely.
Yes.
No, we have a couple minutes. Could I get unanimous consent to have the witnesses answer the question about sanctuary trauma? We've got a couple minutes that would be left anyways.
Do we have unanimous consent?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thanks. So do you need me to re-put the question, or? Okay. So you both had mentioned sanctuary trauma in your remarks. And I guess I wanted to ask specifically in terms of Veterans Affairs, what could they do different in order to reduce sanctuary trauma that veterans and family members experience when dealing with them. And I'd like both of you, if you could, to give a response.
For myself, as a family member of someone receiving these services, a lot of it's the proof and having to retell their story time and time again. It's every year having to prove the disability or the sickness or the diagnosis. You know, even applying for things like such as we talk about stigma and mental health, you know, or resources to help us make us feel better, things being denied, like the request of a weighted blanket or the request of seeing a nutritionist to help with how the PTSD has affected nutrition. It's a lot of, you know, having to prove and prove again, like it's not taken as belief or word, or it's difficult to explain.
I think you've done a very good job of explaining it, you know, that we're having to retell and reprove. That's something we hear all the time from veterans. So you've explained it well, thank you. Madame Veilleux?
Oui. Je voudrais que
Madame Veilleux, briefly, please. Well, it's not my strength. So, actions have to follow through on their promises. When we join the Canadian Armed Forces, we're promised that we're going to have support for life, and then these promises are forgotten, and then we're completely neglected and we don't receive the services we need when we leave the forces. So we have to avoid that sanctuary trauma and make sure that the care is there and that it's well adapted. And Madame Ruth has referred to this pace of support. You have to fit it all into 3 meetings. Well, of course, this trauma is still going to be there and there's a risk of re-traumatization. How many times do we have to tell our story to be taken seriously, to move from one level of care to another, and then to always have to prove this? For example, with sexual violence, did this really happen? So if we could tackle these different points, then I think we'd already be able to prevent, to a great extent, sanctuary trauma. Thank you very much.
Ms. Root, our sincere condolence for your loss. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for coming here this morning. We appreciate it. And Madame Veilleux, un plaisir de vous rencontrer.
It was a real pleasure to meet you, Madame Veilleux.